In episode 2, a hacking collective's loft in the Bronx turns into a massacre scene early in the morning. Alexei Lebedev, a Russian GRU officer stationed at the New York consulate, executes everyone inside. Out of nowhere, Patrick O'Keefe walks in. Lebedev fires at him, but Patrick manages to escape. Later, President Mitchell tells George that the Joint Chiefs gave her a 72-hour window for retaliation, since everything points to Moscow. But George isn't ready to act without proof. He says he'll get to the bottom of it. George heads to the Zero Day Commission HQ, a CIA loaned facility where his teams briefs him on the cyber attack. The systems that failed show no trace of external control, meaning the malware is likely still there, just dormant. Then Carl shows him fresh CCTV images from the Bronx loft. They confirm it was Lebedev who killed the hackers. But there's an unidentified man on the footage. Facial recognition will ID him soon. Meanwhile, Roger checks in on George, who insists he's fine. Their conversation shifts to Anna, his ghostwriter. Roger says she was killed that day, but George isn't convinced. He tells Roger to look into it, make sure she really died. When the facial recognition hits, it identifies Patrick, but his records are classified. Turns out he worked for the US's most elite offensive hacking unit. Roger meets with Robert Lyndon, who wants him to keep the commission focused on Moscow. Robert's happy for Roger and notes how George still trusts him, but then adds if George knew what he knew, that trust might not last. That night, President Mitchell is furious that George identified a Russian intelligence officer at a mass murder scene, but didn't immediately tell her. George argues there is another man in the picture who needs to be ID'd first, and he has a trusted source feeding him information. But Mitchell can't wait. She warns that they won't survive another cyber attack. In 48 hours, she's going live from the Oval Office to announce sanctions, expel diplomats, and launch a targeted cyber strike. Roger goes to the morgue to confirm Anna's death, but when they open her drawer, her body is missing. George later tells him he saw Anna 24 hours after she was supposedly dead at the press conference. Meanwhile, Sheila urges Valerie to return to work for George. She thinks George is surrounded by people they can't trust, and Valerie is the only one who would truly have his back. Richard calls Alexandra, asking her to keep an eye on George. He sets up an oversight committee to hold the commission accountable and appoints Alexandra as its ranking member. George watches her speech and tells Roger to go talk to her. Patrick meets his sister Emma in White Plains. He admits he screwed up, he was lied to. Now he needs to get out of the country on a boat. What he doesn't realize is that Lebedev has already tracked him down. Sheila tells George she asked Valerie to be his chief of staff because Roger isn't up to the job. When George protests, Sheila shuts him down. This isn't up for debate. Roger visits Alexandra at her apartment, trying to talk her out of overseeing the commission. He thinks she's only doing it out of spite. She dismisses him, but the conversation takes a turn and they end up getting intimate. George gets a name, Patrick O'Keefe, from an admiral he used to work with. He tells Carl to track him down. The Zero Day Commission finds Patrick just as Lebedev is about to kill him. Patrick gets arrested, and as Lebedev leaves the port, he gets run over. During questioning, Patrick says Andy Franklin promised to publish the malware, like the Vault 7 leak, to expose how dangerous the US government's cyber weapons are. He swears he never dealt with Russian agents, just Franklin, whose grandfather was Felix. He insists they're hacktivists, not spies, but George and Carl aren't buying it. Running out of time, Carl suggests using enhanced interrogation to get the truth. Roger finds the man who ran over Lebedev in his apartment. The guy hands him an envelope and a message. Russia had nothing to do with Zero Day. Roger pushes back, saying all the evidence says otherwise. The man claims Lebedev was an ambitious GRU officer who had an occasional business arrangement with the Bronx hackers, but Zero Day wasn't his doing. Someone else hired those hackers. Minutes before President Mitchell's speech, Roger hands Carl the envelope. Carl rushes to George. Inside is proof that 6 weeks before Zero Day, the hackers received a large wire transfer, not from Russia, but from an account in North Dakota, linked to a domestic terror group called the Reapers. They're radical leftists. Russia didn't fund Zero Day, it was homegrown. With 15 seconds before her speech, Mitchell gets the note and calls off the address, blaming Russia. That night, George recalls something Nathan mentioned during their call: Proteus. Anna's mother calls Roger, sobbing. She says they buried her daughter that morning, then hangs up. George tells reporters Zero Day wasn't the work of a foreign government. The virus used was originally developed by the NSA, stolen by a disgruntled employee, and later perfected and deployed by the Reapers. The weapon is called Proteus. Afterward, President Mitchell tells George that blaming Russia would have been easier. It was clean, simple, and unifying. Instead, he's just opened the floodgates for conspiracy theorists. George tells her if he's right, she owns it, and if he's wrong, she'll cut him loose. Meanwhile, CIA Director Jeremy warns the president there is a government program called Proteus, but it's not what George thinks. It's classified.